Okay, today we're gonna learn a little bit more VBA through making games. We're gonna learn about making a UI for a game of chess. We're gonna see 3 different ways to do that, because there are many different ways to let the users of your macro interact with it, select where they want to move, and so on and so forth. And they're differently complex, they have different pros and cons, so we're going to see a couple. We are starting with 2 sheets, UI and baseboard. Baseboard contains the game board that I set up ahead of time because printing all of that stuff through VBA is super annoying, so we're just going to set it up in Excel manually. And then every time a game of chess starts, we're just going to copy A1, H8 and paste it in this worksheet. It's going to be much simpler. So we're going to create a macro, set a board. And in this macro, what are we going to do? We're going to make the chessboard pattern so that one cell out of 2 is gray, the other is white. And we're going to copy the stuff from baseboard. So, sheets baseboard dot the range is a 1h8 dot copy. We use the optional destination argument, the copy method, to paste it in sheets UI dot a1. And then we're going to generate the chessboard pattern. The fastest way to do that is like this. For each cell in A1, H8. Okay, I guess I should just activate this. That way, we're going to play on it anyway, so I won't have to repeat myself. For each cell in there, if cell.row plus cell.column mod2 equals 0, then we make it gray. Otherwise, we make it white. Why does that work? Because the sum of the coordinates is going to be either even or odd, and one cell out of 2 is going to have an odd sum, and one cell out of 3 is going to have an even sum, and so that's going to result in a nice chessboard pattern. Equal RGB 128, 128, that's going to be 50% gray. Else we can do cell.interior.color equals white. And if next cell, we're done. So yeah, if I just run this, it should set up the board nicely. Fantastic. We can probably zoom in a little bit. Lovely. So you may be wondering, how did I get the chess pieces into Excel? That's because I'm using Unicode characters. The same way you can type emojis in Excel, you can type characters of which there are hundreds of thousands. Some of these characters are chess pieces for both black and white. This is actually pretty annoying to work with when you're actually trying to make a chess game, because it's going to be harder to figure out which one is the white piece and which one is the blue, which one is white, which one is black. So what I often recommend doing is just using the same kind of piece, the same character for both sides of the board, and then just setting the font color of one of them to white and the font color of the other to black. That way it's going to make your testing much easier. Anyway, we have a board set up. We don't really care about checking whether a piece is black or white because we're just doing UI. Today we're not going to look into actually making a game of chess where we are verifying movement is legal. Movement option 1. The first way we're going to do movement is by using Application.InputBox. You may be familiar with InputBox, which is a function that returns whatever the user typed into it. So for instance, we can do this. User input equals input box, enter a number. Going to make user input be an integer. And then we're going to display like user input divided by 2 or something. So the input box function lets the user enter text, and then you can put that into a variable and do stuff with it. Fantastic. The problem is here, to let the user select stuff, we are going to need them to select a range with the mouse. They could technically type the address of the cell into the input box, but that would be really annoying to play with. If you have to play 50 moves of chess, then you're going to have to type 100 addresses, right? Because you need to first pick the piece you want to move and where to move it to. So that would be super annoying. You're not going to type out 100 addresses. So we're going to use Application.InputBox, which is InputBox's sibling, if you will, which lets us choose the input type that is allowed. So here you can see that we have a context help on the arguments we want. So here it's between square brackets, so that means it's an optional argument called title. We can pick a title for input box, let's say turn. Default, I don't know what that actually does. Left and top is for the position of the input box on the screen in pixels. That's very nice. We could actually have use for that to make sure it doesn't cover the board. We don't really care right now, but if we were making an actual game of chess, that would certainly be relevant. Help file is for the contextual help. We display the user clicks help. We don't care. Same for this one. Type. Type is the one that is going to give us the type of data the application input box accepts. And what we're going to enter is 8, which corresponds to range. How do I know this? Because it's on the Microsoft website. You can just go look at the Microsoft website for which type is what. And here we go. Now application input box is going to let me select a range. So that means we're going to put it in a variable that is not an integer because it wouldn't make sense. Target as range, where to move as range, I guess. We can do this, and then we can do the same thing again. We can write select where to move it, where to move, and then we can just say where to move dot value equals target dot value, target dot value equals nothing. So we're going to make, let's say target was E7 and where to move was E5. Then we are setting the value of E5 to a white pawn, and then target.value becomes nothing, so the white pawn disappears from here, is placed here, we correctly move a pawn. I expect that works without any issue. Or not. Right. This is because target and where to move, for that matter, are object type variables, and when you want to assign a value to an object type variable, you have to use the set keyword before the variable name. Set target equals the value you put into it. No difference otherwise. This is just here to trip me up, apparently. No, there are actual reasons for this, but they're not interesting. Select where to move it. This one. Bloop. There we go. So that's one way to do the UI. You can do things that way. You can also add little checks like input validation to make sure that your while target.value equals nothing, for instance. Again, if we had done the trick I was talking about with the character colors to check whether the piece we're selecting is black or white, and if we had something to keep track of who is the turn player, then we could also have a check to verify, yeah, you're trying to move a piece that is your turn color. You're trying to move a piece into a cell that is either empty or contains a piece of the opposing player, because you can't take your own pieces. Do we actually have a condition on what to move the value in this scenario? Not really, right? Yeah. Ideally, we would check for the piece color, but we can't really do that. This is just an example. So yeah, you can do input validation with a loop around your input box. This is very useful. Even if you're not making a game, it's very useful because if you want the user to input stuff into your macro, then presumably your macro is going to use it, and presumably your macro is not going to like it if they enter stuff that doesn't make sense. So to avoid users giving you bug reports that are actually due to their own stupidity, making sure they can't enter stupidity into your macro is a good bet. It takes you like 10 seconds and it may save you several hours. Always a good idea to have some input validation. Anyway, that's our first option to cover the movement of pieces. We can do this with Application.InputBox, and then we can set all of that inside a loop while there are two kings on the board, essentially. Here we can't really do that because by worksheet function that's countif. Here we can't really do that because there are no good ways to count the value of the kings. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just going to take the kings, put them in J and K. I'm going to say, well, while in A1, H8, the number of times we find the value with J1 plus the number of times I find the value in K1 is equal to 2. That is to say, while there are two kings on the board. While there are two kings on the board, we keep playing. As soon as a king is taken, we lose. One of the players loses. So that's a very bare bones game of chess, because it's just going to keep playing until one of the players loses his or her king. Anyway, on to the second movement option, second way to handle movement in our game of chess. This time we're going to do it with, what would be a nice way to do it? We're going to do it with events. We're going to do it with worksheet selection change, which is a very useful event. Because of that, we actually can't put this macro in here. For the event to even work, it has to be inside the sheet object for UI. Worksheet selection change rival target as range. So what does this do? Every time the selection changes, every time the user clicks on something, it's going to run the macro. Here, all the macro does is make the entire selection red, which is not super important. But we can use it to trigger anything we want. We can use it to, for instance, say, if that cell contains a piece, then we do stuff. So the first thing we're going to do is have a static variable. Static piece to move as range. It's static because that means it's going to keep its value between calls of the macro. Usually, when you run a macro twice in a row, row counter equals row counter plus 1, message box counter. Usually, when you have a variable and you run the same macro twice, it's not going to keep its value between iterations, between times I run the macro. Every time I run the macro here, it displays 1. If I make row counter static, it's going to keep its value between every time I run the macro, and so as you can see, it displays a different value every time. The point being, we make piece to move a static variable to keep the piece we are intending to move between iterations of the selection change event. That's going to be a lot more readable than what we did before with Application.InputBox, because instead of needing to click on a cell, press enter, click on a cell, press enter, we can just click on a cell and then on another cell. So it's going to be a lot nicer to play with. So how are we going to do that? If piece to move is nothing, pretty sure I can do that. Nothing is the same as a 0 for integers or empty string for strings. It's the null value for objects. If piece to move is nothing, do we actually care whether piece to move is nothing? I don't think so. Well, we care later. If target.count is greater than 1, then exit sub. Why? Because if I select like several things, it's not going to make any sense to my macro. So we want to make sure that we are clicking a cell, a single cell. Then we can also say if target.row is greater than 8 or target.column is greater than 8, then exit sub. That way we make sure we are inside the chessboard. We're not trying to move a piece outside the chessboard, even though that would make for an interesting game. Then we're gonna say if target.value is not nothing, that means we selected a piece, which means we're going to assign that value to piece to move. Set piece to move equals target. Okay. And otherwise, if piece to move already contains something, we're going to paste it. If not piece to move is nothing, then target.value equal piece to dot value. We also want to clean piece to move, piece to dot value equals nothing, and we're going to set piece to move back to nothing. I think we can just do an else if here. So we have basic checks at the start to make sure we're not clicking on anything crazy. A little bit of validation. If we already stored a piece, then we move the piece to the cell we just clicked on. Otherwise, if piece to move is nothing, if we don't have a stored piece, then we store a piece. Store a piece, move it, store a piece, move it, store a piece, move it. The way this is coded is also very nice because it lets the player change their mind, unlike the first version with the input boxes. That is to say, if I click on this pawn and then I click on another pawn, never mind, it should have worked. The reason it didn't work is because I don't have a check on colors. I am allowed to take my own pawns. Well, whatever. If we did something with the if we did that trick with the fonts, then we wouldn't have that issue. Actually, yeah, let's do it right now. Let's use the trick. That also means I'm going to have to go into the setup here to make the colors a bit different. This is because if the background of cells is white, I'm not going to be able to see white pieces, right? So 128 plus 64, that's 192. So that's 3/4 gray, and this one is 1/4 gray. There we go. So we should be able to see white pieces and black pieces alike on both kinds of cells. Maybe it's a bit dark for the dark squares. Well, doesn't matter. Next, I'm going to copy all of these, paste them here, copy all of these, paste them here. Okay. I guess that messed the alignment up. Oh yeah, that's right. I need to go back to the baseboard. Yeah. Oh well. In baseboard, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, and these are white, so we can set the font to white, except it's invisible right now. But it's not going to be invisible on the actual board, so it's fine. Make sure this one is black. Yeah, then we're going to do turn player. Then this cell, we're going to do good validation like we did in Connect for video. Let's see. If the cell is equal to 1, then we're going to make it white with white text. And we're going to do the same thing with black, and then we're going to switch around the colors. Actually, we don't even need to do 1, 2, 1, 2. We could just do 1 and -1 to make the flip a little bit easier on me. Highlight cells equal to -1, and we are going to make them black. Doesn't really matter, it's not like it would be a very complicated to write either way. So we have 1 is going to make the cell white, -1 is going to make the cell black, and then we can say things like if the cell I'm selecting its font color is equal to the entire color of K3, then we can do stuff. Set a board. So in set a board, we're going to add 1 line of code, which is K3 takes the value 1 because white always starts. I think that makes sense. Else if target.value is not nothing and target.font.color is equal to k3.interior.color, then we can do that. If not piece to move is nothing and we have two options, either target is empty or target.font.color is different from the turn player's font color. Target.value equal piece to move.value. We also want to change the font, I guess. Target.font.color equals k3.font.color. I guess for consistency, I'm going to write a font color here as well. Is that going to make sense? Is that going to work? Let's find out. I'm not flipping the turn player at all. I'm not flipping the turn player at all. So is to equals to this. K3 takes the value -1 times K3. That way, when it was black, it becomes white. When it's black, it becomes white. Should be fine. We could add a button to reset the board. Turn player is white, so can I move this? Yes. Why? I shouldn't be able to move this. Did I do something wrong? Probably. Can I move this into my own king? No, at least I can't do that, so that's great. Wait, I can't move the white pieces at all, and I can always move the... Why is that? I messed something up. If not piece to move is not, and target.value is, or target.font.color is different from keyfree font color. Target.value is not nothing. Target color. Keyfree font color. When in doubt, we're going to add watches. Also going to add a button because this is getting annoying. Having to flip between a dual and... Let's go to new game. Okay, so if I click on you, piece of move is nothing. Otherwise, target.value is not nothing. It's not. And target.font.color is equal to keyfree font.color. Is that the case? Is that the case? What? Kfont? What? No, it's not 0. Okay, what if we use interior color? That's very strange. I know. Looks the same to me. Okay. And I should be able to click on this. Piece to move is not nothing. One thing I like to do when I'm debugging using watches on range objects is, instead of setting a watch on the range object itself, because then I have to scroll through like 1,000 properties, I set my watch on range object.address, because then it says your range object is F7, which is what I want. You can do the same with target and so on. Target.value is empty, so I should be able to move it there. Target.value equals piece to move.value, absolutely. Target.font color equals keyfree interior color. Piece to move value is nil. Set piece to move to nothing. And we flip the turn player. We go back. Okay, looks better. Yeah, we're gonna get rid of this. Thank you. Or not, since apparently it's not working anymore. Why is that? Piece to move is nothing, so we should be able to do this one. Target.value is not nothing, and target.font.color equals keyfree interior color. Keyfree interior color is still equal to black. What? No, keyfree.interior color is... What? Keyfree.interior color equals... No, it's black. Well, isn't that interesting? Either I'm going crazy, or it seems that conditional formatting, even though it displays the color you set in the rules, doesn't actually affect the color of the cell. That makes sense, actually. That's very interesting. that's very interesting. Okay. Okay. So we're gonna do something a little bit different. If this cell is equal to -1, 0, otherwise 16,777,215, I think is the value. Yeah. We're just going to use if to display the color code we want, and then we can just look at, instead of looking at k3.interior.color, we can look at the value now. Well, I learned something today. Isn't programming amazing? Something every day. Additional formatting, fucking me up. Who knew? It's interesting because I obviously use this trick with the conditional formatting quite often, but I never run into that issue specifically. Well, if target font color is different from this, target color, target dot font color, k3 equals -1 times k. So k3 is going to flip, and then we're going to translate that into L3. And then L3 we can hide the value in the, from the player by just making it white. Okay, it should be fine-ish. Cool beans. Okay. Take a pawn. Move a pawn. Thank you. Take a pawn. Thank you. Move a pawn. Okay. I think that looks good to me. Obviously, you can still cheat and such. There's nothing stopping you from cheating. I haven't coded protection. That's the long part. But yeah, I think that's probably the better way to do UI in VBA, to use a selection change event to let the user select stuff. Another nice thing you can do with selection change is let the user toggle many entries in a list at once. Because let's say you have a bunch of options in a list. Option 1 to 20 or something. And they are going to want to change a bunch of them at once. You could have checkboxes and stuff, but then the user has to click potentially 20 times to do everything they want. So instead, one cool thing you can do, old code, we're going to keep it safe here. One thing you can do is for each cell in target, if cell.interior.color is not VB red, then you set it to VB red. Else you set it to VB white, as you can see, as you cannot see. So I'm going to select or not. I forgot to close my next cell. If no, why is this not working? Oh, it's because I'm in sheet 3, right? This code I put in sheet 1. Again, if you put the code for the event in one sheet, it's not going to run on another. So I need to put it in the sheet 3 object here. So then what this lets me do is turn every option on at once, or turn off a group by selecting this group, or click on one of them and turn them on one by one. So depending on what you want to do, this can be a faster to interact with way to do Boolean settings for your users. You could even do like rotations. You could say that if the cell is red, then you make it green. If the cell is green, you make it blue, so on and so forth. So obviously, if you do that, it has to be crystal clear to the user what each color stands for. But you can still make it readable to them what's happening. Another thing you can do is to create a function that you run in the Excel sheet that does stuff depending on the color of the cell. Kind of like an if function or switch function. That's going to display what each column means, and then you can place that function in column B, then it's going to say option 1 is on, option 2 is on in such case, and so forth. So that's one way to do UI with selection change. I think I said 3 at the beginning of the video, but I actually can't remember what I wanted to do for the third one. So we're just going to do 2. We're just going to do Application.InputBox and selection change. I like selection change better because it's more versatile and it looks better and more responsive. The main downside of selection change is that, as you can see, it's its own separate macro. Because it's its own separate macro, it can't trigger while a macro is running. It's going to trigger right after the macro is done running, which is very annoying sometimes. But that's a topic for another day. So I like selection change, but it can be tricky to use sometimes because you have to make sure that your code ends, then the event can trigger, then the event has to run again. So that can be difficult. Anyway, selection change is fun, and Application.InputBox exists and is actually simple to use for the kind of stuff it enables. Something to keep in mind. Anyway, that's all for me today. Goodbye.